Welcome to Customer-Centered Product Strategy for Machine Intelligence. The section is called Foundations, and it's the third part of an ongoing case study. My name is Joe Lamantia, and I would love to hear comments, feedback, thoughts, and perspectives on the case study overall, and of course on what we're going to share today. The background for this session is a broad ongoing look at a series of B2B product portfolio evolution efforts. This is in the machine intelligence space for a large SaaS product maker or B2B software platform originator. And the three main themes of the case study are looking at customer-centered product strategies, seeing how they're crafted, and then actually watching how they evolve and how that turns into a set of products and a couple of product portfolios that are strongly customer-centered. And then the meta theme is to look at and consider how to establish effective customer-centered product strategy capabilities and practices. So something that you can do again and again and again in a repeated fashion. There's three main topics that we'll talk about right now. The first is looking at a model for product strategy, which is something I think that is missing when you consider the structure and the nature of the discipline. The second is looking at and considering the relationship of business strategy and product strategy, because there's a lot of overlap. There's also, I think, a fair amount of ambiguity, ambivalence, and opacity in that relationship. And then I want to share a definition for product strategy. In earlier parts of the case study, we've said there's two things that are essential to understand about product strategy. First is that it's a cycle, so it's not one and done. It's actually an iterative, adaptive effort, something that happens and plays out as a cycle. And that there really is only one rule for product strategy, and that's you must be customer-centered, or ABC, always be customer-centered. And we put that together as a customer-centered product strategy cycle, which includes four primary components or perspectives: opportunity assessment, product discovery, product and portfolio planning, and then investment. And the benefit of this, seeing it as a cycle and being customer-centered, is clarity, appropriate speed, good timing, strong momentum, and hopefully positive impact in and through all of the decisions that you make and then the outcomes that you reach. So today, there's essentially two more things that I think that we should look at, especially when we want to consider and understand the foundations for product strategy. The underpants gnomes are a good proxy for what I call the unintentional model for product strategy. And so in many cases, this may be how it happens or how it's approached, or if you're not able to articulate a definition and be programmatic about your practices, you end up with an unintentional model or approach. We have some guidance. So Marty Kagan says product strategy speaks to how you hope to deliver on the business strategy. And that's useful. I think especially that notion of hope is quite revealing. So the idea, of course, is that you don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to happen, and you can't predict or control the future specifically. But you do need to be clearly linked to the business strategy that's driving your overall business. That leads to the natural question of, well, all right, how does it actually work? How to do it, what to do, etc., right? And so I think here it's clear that there are strong parallels, and you can get great leverage from seeing product strategy and understanding it as wayfinding. All right, so what's wayfinding? This definition comes from a digitally focused viewpoint, and so wayfinding here is awareness of where one is located and ascertaining a path through an environment to the desired destination. And so you might think that that applies well to the software space, which is, of course, a digital environment. I like this from the character Maui. Maui says it's called wayfinding. It's not just sails and knots. It's seeing where you're going in your mind and knowing where you are by knowing where you've been. And I think what that calls on is the idea that there are some foundation viewpoints that are captured by how you're thinking about it. So I think it's clear that when you look at the way that wayfinding actually functions, it's playing the role of an archetype. An archetype is a term from psychology. That's Carl Jung. He originated the term archetype in the 60s. So it's a useful concept from the social sciences side. Archetype is the original pattern or model of which all things of the same type are representations or copies. strong matches to prototype, which folks from the design space or the product space may know and have some familiarity with. Britannicus's archetype captures something in the literary sense, right? And so if you're looking at how or what archetype accomplishes, it's a primordial image, it's a character or a pattern of circumstances that recurs, right, consistently through thought and literature, and it's consistently enough to be considered a universal concept or situation. So you might think about some of the default story types, right? So rags to riches, lost and found, climb the mountain, right? Some of those archetypes of stories. And I think what's really useful about understanding that wayfinding is an archetype for product strategy is that it captures and clearly spotlights the reality, which is that product strategy is often about framing, establishing, and telling a structured story, right? And then taking people through that story. So product strategy essentially works or does its job, if you will, through the notion of story. And that's captured with this idea of archetype, which has these clear literary connections. All right, so then zooming in and seeing specifically some of the characteristics of wayfinding. This is a definition from the Polynesian Voyaging Society, which has been recreating or curating, extending, and codifying traditional wayfinding practices for some time, again in the 60s and the 70s, I believe, if you look at their history. So wayfinding, in their definition, includes all processes that allow humans and animals to orient themselves, and that includes traveling over unknown or unmarked trails and paths. And I think that specific focus on unknown or unmarked trails and paths is what marks product strategy and wayfinding as connected, because of course you don't always know the future, right? And there's a difference between navigation, which is a subset of wayfinding, and that difference hinges on whether you know precisely where you are and where you are going. So under the broad umbrella of wayfinding, there is a subset, it's navigation, and in this case I think you can see that those different characteristics make wayfinding, the broader term, a better analog or a better archetype for product strategy than specifically navigation. And I used to use navigation actually as a working metaphor, if you will, but I think that wayfinding is better suited. And that's because there's leverage from looking at specifically what wayfinding is and how it functions. So this definition sheds some light on that. Wayfinding here is an art. It's one that involves adapting to variable and unexpected conditions. And the goal of that and how you gauge the success of your wayfinding is through maintaining progress, and that's towards your target or targeted islands. I think there's strong analogs and parallels to emerging spaces and the characteristics of those, right? So they are driven by hype, they are chaotic or highly dynamic and unstructured, or the structure changes repeatedly. So I think there's good matches between wayfinding and specifically emerging spaces. All right, so how does it work? Again, zooming in, when you need to open the hood on wayfinding, so to speak, what you'll see is that there's a role to play. It's not necessarily one person's job or a single person's perspective, right? But there's the role of wayfinding or wayfinder, and that involves designing an ideal course for reaching the destination. That course should be or represent the most efficient way of getting to the destination. You have to choose the right time to go, and that means understanding when conditions are the most favorable, and you have to take into account, plan for, or design and have in mind the return voyage as well. So it's not one time out, it's a complete round trip. I think there's strong overlap and alignment with the product strategy cycle. So for reference, again, the simplified model is opportunity assessment, product discovery, linkage to product and portfolio planning, and product investment as a cyclical activity. And when you look at some of those key characteristics of wayfinding, you can see that alignment fairly clearly. So you're considering, when you're wayfinding, the starting point, you're understanding and assessing conditions, deciding when and what would be favorable conditions, and picking the best moment. That's opportunity assessment. Likewise, in the planning and portfolio management perspective, you're looking for efficiency. You're considering what sequence of things, the specific steps to take, what is the right time to go, and how to manage, right, and complete that design course. And then likewise, in terms of investment, you're thinking about the return voyage and the full cycle. So that's wayfinding as a useful foundation model. We said we would also consider the relationship of business strategy and product strategy. And in this case, I simplify it and say it's a sandwich. Here's what I mean by that. The purpose of product strategy is to articulate or lay out how you hope to deliver on your business strategy. And of course, that would lead you to the question of, well, what exactly do we mean by business strategy and how do we define that? I think it's useful to step back and broaden the lens a little bit and look at strategy in general. So not specifically about products, not specifically about business. And this quote from Roger Martin from a great article called The Big Lie of Strategic Planning, I think is very useful for understanding strategy and what you're trying to do with and through the strategic perspective. Martin says, true strategy is about placing bets and making hard choices. The objective is not to eliminate risk, but to increase the odds of success. All right, so George Carlin used to say, life is a series of dogs. Comedians are always philosophers, of course. That's from Steve Martin. And I think actually that what you can see is that it's a series of hard choices. And so if you think about what business strategy does, it's setting some boundaries and choosing what customer to focus on, what product or products to think about. It's establishing the business plan, and then it's identifying when, where, and how to take action, or also considering what actions not to take, right, and how to make those decisions. So it's a series of hard choices. And then there's guidance, I think, that's useful from Marty Kagan. It's specifically when you're talking about business strategy, it's identifying what objectives you need to meet and then deciding where and how you'll invest to best achieve those objectives. So that pulls in that notion that it's not just making choices, it's specifically making choices about investment. So here's the sandwich, right? Business strategy is a series of hard choices about customers, about products, about planning. And this, I think, clarifies specifically how product strategy works, and that it's a series of investment choices about your products, right? So opportunity investment is about understanding customers. The product discovery stage is about understanding and specifically defining the products that are relevant, right? And then you have planning, and then of course, investment is a form of action. Build, don't build, buy, acquire, merge, expand, consolidate, etc. So that's the sandwich. Business strategy as a bookend or a wrapper, an origination and a destination for the series of investment choices that you'll be guided to through product strategy. And going back to the beginning of this case study, you can see quite usefully, I think, that that structural model shows up when you think about the business strategy, which was analytics products for emerging spaces, and then the series of product strategy cycles, which were choices about investment that we made with build or don't build and what to build, etc. All right, so if you take those two foundations, it's wayfinding, it's a sandwich structurally in its relationship to business strategy, and you see a series of investment choices as what you're going to focus on and how you accomplish it, then you can build a working definition for product strategy, which is that it charts the course of product investment and evolution. All right, so naturally, you're wondering, well, okay, how does it work? Here's where I think there's good utility from considering the what we'd identified as linear model for product strategy. And it calls out 3 questions there. And those questions are, why are you here? Where are you going? And how will you get there? You can see the business strategy speaking to or providing a frame for those questions with these answers. So why are you here? Analytics products. Where are you going? Emerging spaces. So an initial focus on data science and then looking at machine intelligence. And how will you get there? Well, through new products or through a series of products, expanding them, consolidating them. And you can map that back to and show where and how wayfinding shines through to the surface, maybe with a simple picture like this, right? So product strategy does the wayfinding to guide the choices and chart the course, right? For analytics products, potentially new products, of course, through the environment of one or more emerging spaces. And then, of course, capitalism. Being capitalism, everyone hopes, the business will be positive. You'll make money. Your product will succeed, etc. Thanks for listening. I welcome thoughts, feedback, and perspectives. Please find me and say hello.